I guess that many of you have attended these webinars with Scott before. I'm assuming you can all hear me. If you have any comments, questions as we go, you can put them in the chat box. Without further ado, let's start hitting some of these modifiers, meaning, all that good stuff in sentence corrections, so we all become sentence correction masters. We're going to start today by talking about meaning in general and how it applies to modifiers. And let's take a look. Because there's a lot of misconceptions about meaning. There are things we need to know about it and things we need to not know about it. And modifiers, of course, are huge in meaning. So we're going to start with meaning and go into modifiers. And the first thing we need to know about meaning is, in case you've all heard of it, has anybody heard of the thing called intended meaning? Okay. You've all heard of this, right? So, yeah, someone said that's what the author wants to say. It's true that it is. I guess there's some truth in that that's what the author wants to say. Here's the thing, though. This intended meaning thing has gotten a little twisted, because yes, it's what the author wants to say, but there's a lot of talk out there. There's a lot of talk out there about this intended meaning, and as if it's the first meaning we see when we look at the question. It's the meaning of the original version. And here's the deal. Exactly. Intended meaning is people think that what the first option means and try to mean the same meaning in the other option. And here's the deal with that. Does it really make sense that does that concept really make sense? And here's my question. What if the first version has a crazy meaning? Should we then look for that meaning in every other version? How's that going to make sense? How's that going to work out? So there's an issue right there. We can tell that intended meaning isn't really logical. So the question is then, what is logical? And here's the thing that's logical. What we're really looking for when we do this is we're looking for a logical meaning. We're looking for something that makes sense. We're also looking for a meaning that's well expressed. Okay, so a lot of the time we're going to look through these choices, we're going to see a lot of meaning, and none of them are going to be well expressed except for one, and that's going to be our correct meaning. Okay, so let's start off by looking at something here with some modifiers. If you've been using the course, you've been through the modifiers chapter, you've seen this part of the chapter already, but we're going to focus on today. As far as meaning goes, we're going to focus on word placement. And we can see by looking at just these three possible sentences that word placement can make all the difference in a sentence. In this case, these sentences all make sense, but we're going to soon see that it can really change with the meaning and decide whether, and help us decide whether the meaning makes any sense. So looking at this first one, I ate only fruits and vegetables for 2 weeks. Okay, so we're noticing where only is placed here. We say, well, what's the focus of only? Okay, what is the focus? It's focused on fruit. So it's for only fruits. So the point of this version is, I ate only fruits and vegetables for 2 weeks. So by placing only in front of fruits, we're focusing on the fruits and we're saying, this is the only thing I ate for 2 weeks. Okay, great. The second one, I ate fruits and vegetables for only 2 weeks. Just by moving this one word, we've changed the meaning of the sentence. And we could have wrecked it. So let's see what this one, I ate fruits and vegetables for only 2 weeks. Now the only is focused on the 2 weeks. So the point of the second version is that my fruit and vegetable eating occurred for only 2 weeks. Finally, the last one is the one we normally hear people say, I only ate fruits and vegetables for 2 weeks. And this could actually have a couple of meanings, couldn't it? One of them is the only thing I did, as somebody said, the only thing I did was eat fruits and vegetables for 2 weeks. I didn't breathe, I didn't sleep, I didn't watch TV. I only ate fruits and vegetables for 2 weeks. Let me see. I think there's another meaning to this fly. Oh, 2 weeks. Oh, well, we could also. It also means I only ate fruits and vegetables. I didn't throw fruits and vegetables out the window for 2 weeks, right? I only ate fruits and vegetables. I didn't smash them. I didn't give them to my neighbors. I only ate them. So what we're seeing is, by moving this modifier around, we're changing the meaning of the sentence. Now, clearly, if we can move a modifier and change the meaning of a sentence so much, then by moving modifiers around in sentence correction questions, the GMAT test writers are going to be able to change the meanings radically of the sentences they say. So just by watching, or by the sentences they write, and the sentences we see, so just by watching word placement, we're going to get a lot of points in sentence correction. Let's take a look at a clip. Do a warm up. And we'll notice how, as we go through this question, we're going to look at word placement and see how just changing the word placement is going to affect the meaning here. Okay, I'll give you guys 2 minutes to look at this one, go through it. A lot of you probably seen it already because it's in the course. So take a minute before you put your answer in the chat so that people who haven't seen it before can go through it. But going through this, I'm warning you, or the word placement is going to really be the key thing here. Look at where things are placed. Notice that in each choice we see certain words that are placed in different places, especially modifiers. And notice how when we move the wording around, the meaning changes. And what we're doing here is looking for a meaning. What is the point? We're looking for what makes sense. So notice how changing them, I'm sure you guys have seen, a lot of you have seen opening modifiers and things, but really focus on how we're moving a modifier around. And just by moving this one modifier, we're changing the meaning. Okay. We have a couple different answers people focus on. Take one more second for everybody. Okay. Okay, looking at this, this question is about maybe 500-600 level, somewhere in there, low 600 up to 500. It's got one kind of cool trap. So the first thing, we can look at this original version. You see it opens with an opening modifier, right? This is a warning concept, right? Opening modifier. wearing protective eyewear and gloves, the bagel. Okay, so what do we see? Clearly, this modifier has been placed right in front of bagel, so we have an opening modifier problem. Wearing protective eyewear and gloves, what follows this should be whatever wears protective eyewear and gloves. This says the bagel, so this version is out. Are prepared, let's just go through the rest. Are prepared via boiling them in lye, a highly caustic chemical, even in small quantities, which is the traditional method. Does anybody see, I guess somewhere back here, boiling them in lye might be the traditional method, but that's not what which is near to. So once again, looking at word placement keeps us away from A. I didn't see anybody pick A. Let's move down to C. While preparing our protective eyewear and gloves, no one picked C. I wonder why, because we have this opening modifier, the bagels. Once again, word placement saved us from this question. But just by noticing where this is placed, and once again, it's wearing protective eyewear. So this is the thing they have jumping around in this question. The bagels are prepared by bakers using the traditional method of boiling in lye. So everything else here, now we have which is a highly caustic chemical right by lye. So we don't have this issue anymore. But once again, we see that this is misplaced. Okay, fine. Next, D, let's go. So we got a couple easy outs, right? In A, which is referring to what? Which is, I don't know. It should be referring to boiling them in lye. But obviously, since it's right by here, it's referring to chemical. Because which is, so the only singular thing we have here is chemical. Okay, going to 6. The bagels are prepared via the traditional method of boiling them in lye that is a highly caustic chemical. Huh. I mean, we're focused on word placement today, but we can see that we don't need a restrictive modifier that is a highly caustic chemical to modify lye, because there's only one thing. This is one specific chemical already. So now we see our word placement problem again. We have wearing protective eyewear and gloves. What's this modifying? The bakers in there? Is there anything that would be wearing protective eyewear and gloves? Nothing. So this is a totally dangling modifier at the end of this one, because there's nobody or nothing that would be wearing protective eyewear in this verse. Okay, now here's our trap. E. Because it is a highly caustic chemical, even in small quantities, lye, looking good. So we don't have to, what are we doing here? We're comparing, we're seeing wearing protective, the bagels, wearing protective, the bagels. So now we have an opening modifier that works because it is a highly caustic chemical, even in small quantities. Lye, perfect. So far, so good. Okay. Is used by bakers and the traditional method of boiling bagels, which are prepared while wearing protective eyewear and gloves. So they move this again on us just by noticing word placement or modifier placement. We see which are prepared. So what are prepared? Bagels. It's bagels. What are wearing protective eyewear and gloves? I don't think so. So just by noticing where this one modifier, wearing protective eyewear and gloves, wearing protective eyewear and gloves, and wearing protective eyewear and gloves is played, we could basically get this question correct, because in this other one here, there's no, the bakers aren't even mentioned. So this is our easy out. Finally, going back to B, using the traditional method of boiling in lye, a highly caustic chemical, even in small quantities, bakers prepare the bagels. So, okay, using the traditional method of boiling in lye, okay, a highly caustic chemical. So this is in the right place to modify lye. Bakers prepare the bagel. Now, the key thing here is we have to notice that this using the traditional method jumps this entire, or this is part, the highly caustic chemical is part of this open modifier. So the using traditional method correctly modifies bakers who the one traditional method. So this is our correct. Okay. why is E wrong? E is perfect until we get to this modifier. Boiling bagels, which are prepared while wearing protective. So this while wearing is modifying are prepared. Are prepared while. It's like if I said, I was walking while chewing gum while walking. The same person is doing these two things, are prepared while wearing. Okay. So far, so good. So we've seen how moving a modifier around can change everything. So let's hit a little harder question. Let's step it up. And the other thing we notice is there is a point, let's go back to this for 1 second. There is a point to be made. You know, we said there's not really an intended meaning, but there is a point to be made. And the point to be made is that the bakers are the ones wearing the eyewear and gloves. So eyewear and gloves. So we need that to be in there somewhere. We need, you know, you can tell there is a point to be made. So that's how we can tell which meaning makes sense. Because there's a point to be made here. It's not that the bagels are wearing eyewear. You know, we don't have to, you know, we have to use our common sense to tell what point is. And that's what we're seeing here, that the bakers are wearing the protective eyewear and gloves, not the lie or the bagel, that type of thing. We all know what point is to be made. So and that's how we're going to judge sort of against that, not against whatever the first version said. Because look, the first version says that the bagels are wearing protective eyewear and gloves. We're certainly not going to preserve this meaning and try to find it in a different version. We're looking for that version that says the point to be made. Oh, that's a good point too. There is another issue with E. That it's wrong because the opening this is not the point to be made. It is not the point to be made that lie is used because it is the caustic chemical, even in small quantities. That's a very interesting point. I was really focusing on this word placement here, but we can't. It doesn't make. There's not the point to be made that lie is used because it is caustic in small quantities. The point is that it's used by bakers even though it's caustic. Someone said, "Why is Steve wrong?" Because it's basically saying while wearing protective eyewear and gloves, bagels do the following. So it implies that the bagel are wearing the protective eyewear and gloves. Okay, let's move on. Let's step it up a little bit. Yeah? So we're going to look at a harder question now. And we're going to focus on the same thing. We're just mostly looking at two things. What is the point to be made? And what is we're going to notice how modifiers are moved around to change the point. The other thing we're going to do here is read this very literally, okay? When you're reading a sentence correction question, it's not like reading an email from a friend, or it's not like listening to somebody talk and trying to understand what he's saying. We're not going to, in those cases, let's say my friend writes an email. If he says something that sounds a little odd, I'm going to trust that he didn't really mean to say that. I'm going to read the email and say, oh, he misplaced this modifier. What he really meant was this. But when we're reading a sentence correction question, we want to read it very literally because we're trying to figure out which version says something that makes sense, okay? So we read them as if the person wrote what he meant to say. So as you're going through this question, read it as if he meant to say what he's saying. Now, don't cut this writer any slack. If he says, something insane, that's what that version says. That's probably not the correct version. So I'll give you guys 2 minutes to go through this one. And notice two things. Read it literally and say, does this really make sense what this person is saying? And notice how moving modifiers around changes the meaning. So you'll see, if you see one word in 5 different places in the sentence, that's a good sign that that's what something we really need to pay attention to. Like which version? did they put the word in the right place? Okay, how about a minute and a half? Don't do it too quick, folks. Be careful. See what this thing says. Here we have a few different answers. Apparently, there's some easy outs. So let's go through this. Let's get rid of the easy outs first. Let's look for meaning, and let's check out modifiers. Looking at the first version, and we're going to always consider this non-underlined portion too, right? The Tourism Commission. Okay, we'll wait. I give it a little more time. Okay, so we look at this, we have to keep the non-underlined portion in mind, right? Because that can really affect what's right here. So the Tourism Commission has conducted surveys of hotels in the most popular resorts. Okay, so this is an independent clause. So it looks like what's coming after it is modifying this independent clause. With the ultimate goal, okay, of reducing the guests who end up expressing overall dissatisfaction with the service in the hotel. So we have to figure out what's the point to be made, and we're going to read this very literally. Okay, with the so the Tourism Commission has conducted surveys with the goal, that sort of makes sense. I don't know about the with, but okay, fine, of reducing the guests who end up expressing dissatisfaction. Now remember, we have to read these literally. We're not reading it the way we read an email from a friend. So if my friend said, man, we've really been reducing the guests, or we've been increasing the guests, well, okay, your friend, you know what he means, they're reducing the number of guests. But when the GMAT says reducing the guests, we're going to take the GMAT at its word and realize that this version doesn't make sense. We're not reducing the actual guests, we're making them smaller. Are they losing weight? You know, with the, I don't know. We're reducing the guests who making the guests smaller who end up expressing dissatisfaction. That can't be right. So this version is out. Okay, that was sort of an easy out if we're paying attention to meaning. Okay, let's check out B. With the goal to ultimately reduce the number of guests who end up expressing overall dissatisfaction with the hotel service. Honestly, I don't know. I'm looking at ultimately reduce. I'm not so sure about this. Ultimately reduce. I mean, that could be kind of right. So we should, I think this is not one of our easy outs. So we're going to keep B. Okay, let's move on to C. Ultimately, with the goal to reduce expressions of overall satisfaction by the guests with the hotel service. Okay, the Tourism Commission has conducted surveys of hotels ultimately with the goal. What does that mean? Ultimately, they're doing this ultimately, and they're doing it with the goal. that doesn't really mean anything. Doing something ultimately means sort of doing it for the last time. So we're doing it for the last time with the goal to reduce expression. That sounds a little off. So notice we're moving ultimately around here. So we're ultimate goal, this makes sense. To ultimately reduce, that's starting to sound a little odd the more I focus on it ultimately. See how this kind of starts dawning on you as you're reading the versions? You start picking up, wait, ultimately, now I'm looking back at D, it's not looking good. But anyway, C is out, because ultimately with the goal, it's just sort of disconnected. They're doing it for the last time with the goal. That's not the point to be made here, right? I'll catch that question, a couple of these questions coming in as we go through it. Okay, D, in an ultimate attempt to reduce the number of guests that ends up. See a couple things going on here, but once again, we see we're moving around this word ultimate again. So now it's an ultimate attempt. You know, this is funny because this sounds correct. We hear in an ultimate attempt all the time. So I guess that could be correct. It means in a final attempt. So ultimate isn't so crazy there, but I don't, you know, we saw the ultimate goal here. I have a feeling that's not going to really work. Anyway, in an ultimate attempt to reduce the number of guests that ends up expressing, wait, a number?
It's not
Ends up expressing? Notice what they did here? This is ends up. It's a singular verb, so it must go with number. But is the number expressing dissatisfaction? So once again, by reading this very literally, we can't have the number ends up expressing, and guess won't work with ends up because guess is plural and ends up is singular. So by reading very literally, we can't have number doesn't work read literally. Guess doesn't work with subject verb means, so D is gone. That's one of our easy outs. Okay, finally, E. With the ultimate goal of reducing the number of guests, this is starting to look pretty good. So ultimate is once again placed in front of goal. That makes sense. So with the ultimate goal, so their ending goal of reducing the number, we can reduce a number unlike we can't reduce the guests, but it makes sense to reduce the number of guests. So, okay, now reading literally, this makes sense, of guests who express overall dissatisfaction with the hotel service. E is looking good, so we're really down to E and B. Moving back up to B again, if we look at our word ultimately, where this place, with the goal to ultimately reduce. What does it mean to ultimately reduce? It doesn't really mean anything. You know, to ultimately reduce the number of guests who end up expressing. So ultimately reduce, does it mean we're reducing for the last time? How do we ultimately reduce? I ultimately reduce that would be my goal. My goal is to ultimately reduce. So I'm reducing it for the last time? I don't think so. An ultimate goal would be reducing the number of guests. So E is our correct version by noticing two things. We notice word placement, this ultimate is all over the place. And we notice theological meaning read literally. Yeah. I guess B kind of, if you say ultimately, it means, yeah, but it means to eventually reduce. I guess it sort of means eventually, but it's kind of coming off. This is also not idiomatic with the goal to ultimately reduce. This is a 600, 700, upper 600, about, I would say V40, V38, V40 level. Yeah, I mean, some people are asking about goal 2 and goal of is definitely better. I've just been focusing on the word placement for the purpose of this session. But we could also look at some of these and say goal 2. That's not really right. Ultimately, doesn't quite mean eventually, it means finally. So it's the goal to finally reduce the number of guests. I don't know. You don't have a goal of finally doing. My goal is to finally do something. I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense. But yeah, it does help. This goal to definitely help get rid of it. Yeah, the goal of reducing. Goal to reduce a little. It sort of works. On reducing is a little better. Okay, let's. For some of these, you just sort of have to know your modifier. Someone's asking how you know if goal to or goal of is better. You know, you have to know your idioms. But by the way, do we need to know that idiom to get this right? No. If we notice this word, this intended, you know, not intended meaning, this logical meaning stuff, reducing the gas to ultimately reduces. I mean, the ultimate goal of reducing makes complete sense. The goal to ultimately reduce, I'm not really sure what that means. You know, so E is a much better version. So without knowing any idioms, we could easily get this question right. Okay, let me see if I saw questions. Okay, let's step it up. We're going to do it again, and we're going to keep looking at the two things: word placement and meaning when read literally. And we'll see if this is going to get us through. Now we're moving up to a harder question. And the same thing is if we're paying super close attention to, well, does this mean something logical? And, you know, and part of that is really paying attention to where the words are placed. I really feel that that was when I finally started just paying attention to word placement. It really opened my eyes in the sense of correction stuff. Once again, look at this question. We're going to see the same thing moving from place to place and the meaning changing. And one of these makes the most sense. So let's take a minute and a half. Let's take 2 minutes on this one. It's a pretty hard one. Take your time. Look for easy outs. There's a couple easy outs in here. Get rid of them. Then you're making your job easier, because if you can get rid of the easy outs, now you're only working with a couple choices, 2, 3 choices, right? So you don't have as much to think about. Your mind is a little clearer. You're just dealing with a few different things to look at. A few more seconds. Okay, this one's getting a little trickier. Definitely have to look twice. Anybody what are the easy outs in this one? You see any easy outs? Yup, gone. A, some A is out. I agree with A and C. Why are they easy outs? Yes, because we have this here. As a result of many advances, many people, well, that has to work with what comes after it. And that, as we all know, can't refer to people. So they gave us a break here by giving us two easy out choices. At least somebody's saying D is an easy out as well. I don't think D is as easy as some of the others to get rid of. So, but anyway, by getting rid of A and C, now we have a three-choice question. We're in a much better position to rock this thing and make sure we don't miss it, because we're down to three choices. Let's go through the rest of these choices. Starting with, let's start with E. And we always read this non-underlined portion. As a result of medical advances, many people who, when they were children, might at one time have died. So I think the key thing we're seeing here, when they were children, might at one time have died. So they were children. This is our opening modifier on this clause, or it's sort of an opening modifier. I mean, it's a modifying clause, excuse me. When they were children, might at one time have died. We're reading this literally. So when they were children, they might at one time have died. So wait a minute. And reading the rest of this sentence, okay. Now notice we need to read the rest of this non-underlined portion. When they might have died of such infections as diphtheria, pneumonia, or rheumatic fever, now live well into old age. So this is saying they're living well into old age. We read the very last part of the non-underlined portion to see that, wait, they didn't die when they were children. They lived into old age. So this read literally says when they were children, they might at one time have died one time, and now they lived into old age. Doesn't make any sense. He is out. Read literally. Okay. D. Down to two choices now. Who in childhood might have at one time died. Notice that we have a modifier here again. Who in childhood might have at one time died. And now they live well into old age. So this is doing the same thing, people. Who in childhood might at one time have died. It almost sounds right to me. So let's go and take a look at D and compare these two. We're down to two choices. These are the infamous last two choices. Let's not be too quick to pick D. Look at B. Who might once have died in childhood. What does that mean? Who might once have died in childhood. You know, both of these are a little sketchy to me. Who might once have died in childhood of infections, now live well into old age, or who in childhood might have at one time died. Okay, so I see in childhood is the end here, and in childhood is the beginning. So this is our move modifier. So who might once have died in childhood, or who in childhood might have at one time died. It's basically, because once sort of means the same thing as at one time. So we're basically moving this around, right? So that's our key difference here. Who in childhood might have at one time died in D? So it's basically saying in childhood, they might have died, are now living well into old age. Well, that doesn't make any sense because they didn't die. So we know that it's not the case that they might have died. On this case, it said who might once have died in. So basically, who at one time might have died in childhood. Okay, you see the difference there. So B rather. D is a little different from D. The childhood thing moved. By moving this one word, we made D, or this one modifier, we made D incorrect. And B nails it. Let's see if it's correct. Might once. You know, what does once modify? It's kind of saying who might at one point in time in the past. It's not the clearest thing ever, is it? Did they make this, you know, is the B version a great sentence? I don't think so. Who might once have died in childhood? I think if I wrote that, somebody would ask me to rewrite it. That's the nature of these GMAT sentences. But a lot of the time, but who might once have died, who so once means sort of like at one point in time, who might at one point in time in the past have died. Okay? And someone's asking, why is D wrong again? Who in childhood, so this is saying within childhood, might have at one time died. So during childhood, this person might have died at one time, but he lived. So basically, the person didn't die, so we know he might. It's not the case he might not have died. You know, someone's saying that once is more clear. It's true. It is. It's a little more clear than at one time. But honestly, the placement of in childhood is really the key here. You know, it might is fine either way. It means sort of may in a very, but it probably didn't happen with very low probability compared to me. Can I explain E again? Yeah. So the whole thing with this is what we're doing is looking at we're looking at the placement and then time sequence basically. So this is saying, he is saying when they were children, they might have died. They might have during their childhood died. Well, they didn't die. You're saying, oh, Jim, when he was a child, he might have died, but did he die? So the point, it's, I mean, it's so hard to say, you know, say it the same way they say. It's basically, he is saying, oh, maybe he might have died. It's possible that he is dead. You know, but he didn't die. He lived well into old age, so we know that he didn't might have one time died when they were children. Okay, so basically we looked at two things. We looked at one, what conveys a point to be made, a logical meaning in you know, and the other thing is we're partly doing that by just looking at where things move around. So just by moving in childhood from the beginning of D to the end here in E, in B, we got a meaning that makes a lot more sense. Okay, then I'll reiterate that. Who in childhood might have at one time died. So this is basically saying who during childhood might have at one time died, but the person didn't die. So we know that it's not the case that he might have at one time died in childhood. You know, you can almost sort of reverse in your mind. Oh, he might have at one time died in childhood. Well, no, let me not do that. Scratch that. We're saying who during his childhood might have died one time. Did he die? No, he lived well into old age, as we see in this at the end here. So it's not the case that in childhood he might have died one time. That's what's wrong with B. Whereas B is saying who might at one time back in the past have died in childhood. Is it 100% clear? You know, is it 100% clear? B, no. Is it that much better? No. Is it a great way to write the sentence? No. It's just a little better. Neither one is great. Why am I ignoring of such infections? It's just a modifier. I mean, I read it the first time through, but now the real point here is that we know the person lived well into old age, so he didn't. There's no chance he might have died. D is talking to basically, yeah, D is saying that they might. Well, I don't know what D is saying. It's really not saying anything. So it's saying something illogical. It's saying that this person, some people might have died, but they lived into old age. So it's not the case that they might have died. We know they didn't die. Okay, we have a few more minutes. We have about 10, 15 more minutes. So let's, anybody have any questions, any general questions about sentence correction, about modifiers, about meaning, about word placement, anything that we could go over? Or about TTP in general. quick analogy. While I'm thinking about that quick analogy, if I can come up with it, it's a little tough on the spur of the moment. What sections of sentence correction are most common on the TMAT? I think subject-verb agreement it shows up everywhere. You know, comparisons is there a lot. Parallelism is there a lot. At the same time, we really need to know all these things. And finally, I would say meaning is throughout. If you get meaning, you're taking care of a lot of sentence correction. So yeah, you know, subject-verb agreement, you got to know your parallelism. You have to know your comparisons. Those are huge. But everything's going to matter. Modifier shows up all the time, and meaning is your killer app. An open and close is subordinate clause. Not really. No, it's not necessarily going to modify the subject. The opening clause could sort of be on a somewhat different topic even. You know, it's just presenting different information in a subordinate clause. So it's not necessarily going to follow that rule of modifying the subject as it's called follow. Is it true that official GMAT questions test idioms way more? No, it's not. And part of the reason it might sort of seem that way is because if you're going on GMAT Club and looking at questions, you're seeing a lot of old questions, and they used to put more idioms in there, but they kind of stopped doing that because they want to make it a logical test, and they also, the point is not, I mean, idioms, if you live in the United States, you know these idioms, you've been speaking English all your life and hear them all the time. It'll make that test, they'll be pretty easy for you to know, but somebody who just learned English somewhere else is going to learn all these, you know, not that important idioms. So it wasn't a great way to have the test. So they really reduced the idioms in sentence correction. I reduced the number of idioms in sentence correction. And the other thing I would add to that is most of these things we're calling idioms are not that, you know, a lot of them you can just logic out, you know, so idioms are really funny. I was so excited when the last time I took GMAT, I noticed there were no idioms in any of my sentence correction. Common mistakes I see students make in verbal. I mean, really, the mistake is people practice too fast. I know that might not be exactly what you said, but that's one of them. Is everybody practices way too fast, and you know you figure, well, I'm going to learn how to do this by practicing fast because I only have 2 minutes to do the questions on the test. And you just don't give yourself time to learn. The people I see practicing taking 5-10 minutes per question a lot of the time, they end up killing the test because they give themselves time to learn. And skill is what's going to make you fast. As far as some other mistakes, I don't know, critical reasoning, people don't read the conclusion clearly enough. If you don't get that conclusion tight in critical reasoning, they can slip any kind of trap value. In sentence correction, a common mistake, just have one on the tongue, but sentence correction, a common mistake is making up rules that don't exist. You start seeing things that look different from each other, and you start making up rules. That's a hugely common mistake that people make. Just if you're not sure what's going on, take the time, especially when you're practicing. Now is the time to take your time. Don't make up a rule. Don't come up with something you're not sure about. Learn to develop the skill and really seeing what's going on. Someone asked, okay. You need to practice OG questions. You could. Depends how many more you want to do, if it's enough. Practice OG questions after student TTP. I noticed this SC is an OG 11. This question is a very old question, but I think it adheres to what they're doing today, so I think it's a good one. The latest OG version is the 22 version. Let's see. I answered the OG question a minute ago. Do you have any practical strategies to remain focused on trying to figure out the answer? Yeah, be aware that you lose focus and just bring yourself back. You know, it's funny, losing focus is sort of an urge. You have to ride out the urge to lose focus and sort of just keep going. Like proceed as if you haven't lost focus. Just keep hitting it. I mean, we all have a thing we do when we see the questions. I have a tendency to freak when I see a question that I don't know how to answer. Like, oh man, what is this? How can they do this to me? And I learned to ride it out and just keep working on it. So by riding it out and continuing to go through the motions of answering the question, you bring yourself back into focus. Yeah. I mean, we all have our moments. Like you don't want to keep going. Here's the deal, it's partly emotional. When you're taking the GMAT, getting these questions right is partly an emotional thing. You're going to have moments like you're wondering, well, why am I losing focus? Because, you know, I don't know, there's a whole lot of things going on. It's partly that you're getting tired out, but it's partly that some part of you that needs to be developed or needs to be convinced or something, you're coming right up against that thing. So if you're losing focus in the middle of a practice question, that's when you want to just keep going. Like just keep working on the question. You'll notice you're developing a new skill, you're developing new psychology, you're developing new emotions. And if you just keep working on that question, no matter if you're feeling sick, you just want to guess on it. It's been 10 minutes, it's making you crazy. This is when you're learning. Are the RC passages representative of those in the GMAT? Should you work on additional material? You know, honestly, the TTP RC passages are good. There are only a certain number of them, so I would do as many RC passages as you need to be getting questions correct. Quant verbal or verbal first in terms of ordering. It really depends on you. I do quant first because I need all my energy for quant. So if you need all your energy for some section, then maybe do that one first. You know, and if one section is super easy for you, then do that one second. But if it's a little closer and you need a little more energy for one than the other, I don't know, you know, then it's a little tougher to say. You know, maybe you do your good section first and really nail that one, and then you can, you know, the home stretch, you can do the one that's a little harder for you. It really depends. You know, so yeah, you have to sort of gauge what works for you. The GMAT studying process is an emotional thing. It definitely is. As Samantha was saying. So do we have any other questions? Okay, cool. So that wraps this up. Okay, we do have another question. 700 questions, right? But they take a bit more time. You know, if you look up how to speed up in GMAT verbal, I have a blog post. Do a Google search on how to speed up in GMAT verbal, then you might get some answers on how to speed up without losing accuracy. So how to speed up in GMAT verbal, if you do a Google search, how to speed up in GMAT verbal TTP blog, there's 5 steps you can take to speed up without losing accuracy. Okay. Oh, someone put up an analogy. A result of medical advances, people might once have died in war, now live in old age. Perfect. Yes, exactly. That's pretty good. Okay, cool, folks. That was really fun. I hope you enjoyed the game. And here are the takeaways. We're going to notice where words are placed. We're going to look for easy outs and to make the work easier for ourselves. And we're going to notice what happens when we read a sentence literally. Does it mean something that really is a point to be made? Does it mean something is saying? We're not going to give the GMAT sentences any quarter. Thank you all very much as well. It's been fun. Can't wait for next week. Take care, everybody. Yes, I sound young. I'm a healer. I stay healthy. Take care. Yeah, we're going to do some CR.